Hi, we're Nia and Marianne from Seren Health Coaching. We are metabolic health coaches who are passionate about good metabolic health for everyone. We also love to chat about all things health and to share as much information as we can with people who want to make changes to their lifestyle but aren't quite sure where to start. We're going to release a new episode every Friday where we talk about a different aspect of health. So do subscribe and let us know what you think. We'd also love to know what you're interested in too. So if there's something that you'd like us to have a chat about, do send us a message and we'll do our best to cover it soon. Good morning, Marianne.
Hi, today we're talking about something really close to our hearts in a way, and also very topical. So, we're going to talk about obesity, but really in the context of medicalising this complex condition now that we have access to a class of weight loss drugs that actually work.
Okay.
And is this changing how we see obesity as a society? That's what I'm interested in because this is complicated. So, does medicalizing it mean we're seeing it more as a societal issue, like it's a disease and there's a lot of people with it, and less about individual responsibility, which is, I think, historically how we saw obesity.
We have, yeah.
And it's not a bad thing we're changing that narrative, by the way, because it's never been a very useful narrative, as we
No.
know. But if so, where does it leave lifestyle in all of this? So it's almost as if these weight loss drugs have oversimplified a very complex condition or symptom of metabolic disease. So obesity, you can see, it's really seeable. So it's not one of those silent.
It's not a silent killer, is it? No.
No, we can see it. And not only do we see it, but there's lots of other bits to it, i.e., it's not fashionable. There's part of it's also part of the cosmetic sort of thing.
Oh, very much.
And
Yeah.
if you go back in history, there were times when it was very fashionable to be obese, by the way. So I think we don't take a lot of this into account. It's not so simple. But because these drugs have been
Work.
sold as a simple answer to a complex question, I'm really interested in, is this making us forget about the root cause, which still remains the way we live?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm interested in what happens in what we might say like a hostile environment, because the environment is
Yes.
not changing.
No. We're in the
So
same environment that's getting us into trouble,
yeah,
but
we
we're now
haven't
taking a
changed that.
drug.
We've just put in the drug. So it's a bit like
Exactly.
weaning people off crack cocaine and then
Yeah,
moving their drug dealer in next door.
absolutely. I do see it like that. So you're putting people back into the same set of
Yeah,
conditions that got them there in the
in
first
the
place.
first place.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
does that mean that the drug then has to be forever? And what
Yes.
what implications are there for that?
Yes.
Do we
Yeah.
get used to it? Does it get less
Yeah.
effective?
Does it work
Can
forever? Yeah.
can we afford it?
Can we
Um,
afford it?
what will be the side effects that we are not yet aware of?
Yeah.
And that, this
Obviously
will be another
worries.
podcast because we're going to
Yeah.
talk about this in more detail. But
Yeah.
this is what I would love to know, is what happens when in 10 years' time
Yeah.
we've got people who've had these drugs consecutively.
Yeah.
What will their health be like then?
Could there be an epidemic of pancreatitis? This is not fear mongering, by the
Gastroparesis.
way, but there might be sequelae that we don't know about. But having
So
said that, this is still a really interesting
yeah,
class of
so
drugs.
so
Okay.
we're going to go back to that, aren't we, in another
Yeah,
podcast?
we
But
will.
let's keep on track with what we're going on
Keep on
today.
track so hard.
Yeah.
So I sometimes dream about, I'm very interested in the environment because I think the environment, as we've said before, is really key
So
to how you
key.
live. So it's so
Yeah.
easy in a healthy environment to live well. And
Of
it's
course.
so easy to not live well in an unhealthy environment. So wouldn't we be better really thinking about how we change that environment systematically?
Yeah.
So, do we build more cycle tracks, get people to work closer to home, all sorts of things. But
Yeah.
that's the question.
So this draws a real parallel,
Yeah.
actually. When you talked about the crack cocaine, when I was
Yeah.
watching, me and my strange
Yeah.
taste in TV, I was watching a documentary the other day about the fentanyl crisis in America.
Yes, very
And
similar.
there was an amazing woman who had set up a rehab center,
Yep.
and she'd helped a guy get clean, and then she'd gone to visit him, and he'd actually moved like 2 or 3 states away to a really very remote place.
Right.
And she came to see him and check up and see how he was doing,
Yep.
totally unannounced, and he was still
Yep.
clean and everything was fine. And he said to her, he said, I
I
have
couldn't have
changed
done
my
this.
environment because I
Yeah.
couldn't go home, because I
No.
knew where all the dealers were.
Of
I knew
course.
they knew where to find me. I knew
Yes.
where to find them. He said,
But isn't
interestingly,
yeah.
this
Yeah.
is a parallel that I thought was fascinating. Interestingly, he said,
Mm.
I can still go in this state. He said, I don't know where the dealers are per se, but if I'm in a bar, I know who's dealing.
Yeah.
And it's the same for obesity. It's like if we change our environment, we can still access the bad stuff.
That's a really good analogy. So the painkillers that started all this were sold as a good thing, weren't they?
Oh,
The idea was that nobody should be in pain.
yeah. Fentanyl is a fantastic drug for patients who've got bone pain and cancer. Of course
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. So this is very similar to saying nobody needs to be fat. And not only that, maybe we eventually blame people if they're overweight.
Yeah, and therefore you've got access to this drug
Because,
now, so why have
yeah.
you not used it?
Oh, that's a
Yeah.
whole nother question. But okay,
Okay.
let's
Anyway,
try and
back
keep
to the
on
environment.
track. Yeah, it's really hard to keep on track. Okay, so what is our question?
So, if basically, is our societal view of obesity changing? And
Okay.
are we now looking to see this as a metabolic disease that should be medicalised and treated as such because we now have this effective class of
Yes.
drugs?
So I do think there's a change in the air.
Mm,
I think way back in the day, we generally like to blame the individual, and we've all
yes.
done it. We are not,
Not immune.
not
No.
immune. Okay, and we blame them around their choices around food, and I suspect that with more and more of us getting overweight,
Mm,
and that's since 1970, there's been a huge hike in the number of people
in
overweight.
obesity. Yeah.
I think this view started to shift a little bit anyway, because we're slightly more empathetic when we get overweight ourselves to other people. I think years ago we just said, well, you're obviously greedy and lazy, but I don't think we're quite
No.
there now. So there has been a change anyway
Which
in
is
the
good.
air.
Yeah.
And I looked up on PubMed to see if there were any good studies about this sort of the attitude to
Mm,
weight management, and they're not a lot, of course, but there was a small US study which was done 10 years ago, and it was quite interesting, it asked respondents to place in order whom and what they thought was responsible for the obesity epidemic. So it
mm.
set out the epidemic, and then it said, okay, in the following order. So you have to put one on
Who's
the yeah.
culpable for this?
So
Yeah.
things like
Okay.
food manufacturers, government policies, individuals, grocery stores, and all this. And guess what? The top was the individual at
Yeah.
80%. So 80% of respondents said the
It's your own
individual was
fault.
number one, and second was parents
Hmm.
of children, right? That was
Hmm.
59%. Now, this was done 10 years ago, and there'll be a shift since then,
Yeah.
even. But I suspect this was a good illustration of where we sort of were,
Mm.
stroke are as a society, certainly a decade ago, anyway, looking at obesity. And has that changed now? But what I'm really interested in now is this huge discussion about weight loss drugs that has
Come up.
ensued after the
Yeah.
launch um, means that we are starting to shift that view.
Mm.
Because 60% of us in the UK are now overweight or obese. Did you know that?
Mm. Mm.
60%. Okay. So that only leaves 40% of people
Who
who
are not?
aren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can't
So
all be our faults, because there must be something in the air, mustn't there? It's not just that we're all eating
no,
more and we're all lazier.
we didn't
Okay.
all just decide to eat
No,
more food.
no.
It's just no.
Okay.
So I think the change in thinking has obviously been highlighted by
Yeah.
the launch of these drugs, and there's
Yeah.
been a huge amount of excitement about them.
Yeah.
And it almost seems, again, too good to be true. It's just such a
Yes, and
simple
we're so
answer.
cynical, aren't we? So
I know.
we very warily look on and think anything that's too good. But anyway, let's not be
But
too cynical.
yeah, I think I do see it as, in a way, a good thing that you can see this as a medical condition.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's a response that actually works. So we know that we've been trying to deal with this problem for a long,
for a
long
long
time.
time.
we've had, you know,
Without
weird
much.
diets, we've had surgical interventions that
Yeah,
are easily bypassed. I mean, we've all heard the stories of people who've had a gastric band and then
yeah,
just
all that.
blended the Mars bars, and so they haven't
Yeah,
lost any
yeah, yeah,
weight.
yeah. Or only lost the weight for a certain window of time, and then, yeah, all
Yeah,
that.
and then we've had previous pharmaceutical endeavors which
Yes,
which have been very
yes.
interesting.
Yeah, there was always there was the town halls, or the sort of village halls with the man with the amphetamines. You probably don't remember that. That was more in my youth,
Yes, they
which
were
was
banned by the
very
time I was
frightening, terrible idea. Which basically made you go very fast, so you couldn't
Yes,
stop and you couldn't eat. And
yeah,
then there was that terrifying drug, which we all used at some time, that gave people diarrhea when they ate fat, which was
yeah.
part of the low fat sort of thing,
Do you know
which
people are still trying to
they're
use
still
that?
trying it. Yeah, great drug, not. And remember, all our lifestyle stuff, which you could put into one sentence in the medical world,
Mm,
lifestyle, improve it,
yeah.
and has really not had great results. And the data
No,
bears that out, because basically this problem ain't gone away and it's got bigger and bigger. And did you know nearly 50% of us are on a weight loss diet at any point?
that's mad.
That's stunning, isn't it? So it's not a lack of trying
No,
to do something about this. We're all trying really hard.
yeah.
And so the launch of these drugs is a really important sort of move forward in a
Mm,
way, I can
mm,
see. But how important? And will the pendulum, that's my thought, will the pendulum swing too much into, this is not your fault, this is a medical disease
mm,
in its own right,
mm,
and we have a medical answer for you, and it happens to be pharmacological.
yeah.
And even, as we are complete enthusiasts, aren't we, about metabolic health?
Mm,
And we don't really necessarily see obesity as only a disease. We see it as also a symptom
yeah, of all
of
the other
of
metabolic
metabolic
issues.
ill health. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit different for us. We don't say, it's just a disease process the same as some of the others. We say this is a metabolic manifestation
Mm.
of
And
of ill
yeah,
health.
my concern with that is that, as you said, we can see from 1970
Yeah,
rates increasing.
yeah,
So we've always
hugely.
had obesity, but
Mm,
there has been something to change it. So we can't just
exactly. So
say this
what
is a new
happened?
disease.
What happened in 1970? Well,
Yeah,
we
you
sort
had
of
there
we
is a
can
root cause here. There is
we have a
cause and
few
effect.
clues, and
Yeah,
it's
and it's
not
this
pharmacological.
no, and it's the same as, with metabolic diseases, it's the same as type 2 diabetes. We have
Yes,
seen a huge increase in that. We
yes. So
used to
why?
have
Yes,
people in their 80s developing type 2
yeah.
diabetes,
And
and
now
we
they're
said,
in their
"Oh, no big deal." Well,
yeah.
now they're in their 20s.
Yeah, yeah, and even younger. So you
Yeah.
see children now with type 2 diabetes. So absolutely something's happened, isn't it? And
So,
it's
yeah,
multifactorial, as
it's
they
a bit
say.
I
Yeah,
think it's a bit blasé of the
yeah,
pharmaceutical companies and the medical
yeah. To
professions
sell this as a simple,
to sell this as a simple,
yeah,
"This is happening, we've treated that."
yeah,
So
yeah.
I am
That's what I'm worried
yeah,
about. And also,
I'm
if you leave all that aside, what about the whole fashion for leanness and the inevitable cosmetic use of these drugs, which we
yeah,
all know are available
absolutely happens.
privately?
Yeah.
And isn't this a whole nother thing? And we're not going to talk about this particular year, but there's a lot of people who have access financially to a drug that makes them leaner. And it's
Mhm,
very fashionable to be lean. So, you can
mhm.
see the inevitable consequence of that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the people who've got the financial access also have the influence to talk about it and
Yeah.
spread the information that this is what they should be doing.
That it's a
So,
wonderful drug, yeah.
yeah, so very dangerous in that respect. So, looking at like factually at the
Yep,
evidence, we have a drug that works.
it does.
Okay,
It
so that's good. And it's a real step forward, and there may be some good side effects we don't yet know about. Every drug
yes,
will
yes,
have a beneficial, very
yeah,
let's think
benefits you
about
didn't expect.
let's think
Yeah,
about Viagra. Not many people will know that Viagra was intentionally
yeah,
developed to treat pulmonary hypertension.
yes, but people's
It just
it
so
had this
happened that when they
little
were doing the
effect.
clinical trials, they found a nice side effect, and that's why it ended up being
And aren't most drugs
changed.
like that? Did they
Yeah.
find, I don't know, it puts your blood pressure down, but it was actually launched for something else, whatever?
There are
Yeah,
lots and lots of different things. So, you know, all we there's always going to be
yeah,
studies that are gonna come out and say, "Well, this is excellent because now we can do this." And I think it's really difficult at the moment to really see the true benefits of these for the group of
yeah,
patients for whom they are a lifesaver.
absolutely.
Actually, we've got so far down the track of talking about the everyday Joe
Yes,
who
and
struggles with
weight
their weight
loss. We're
that we
so
forget,
fixated on weight loss.
yeah, that we are
Yeah,
forgetting about these people who, through no fault of their own, have been incredibly um,
yep,
obese for,
affected, yeah.
and this is life saving for them, but we are so going
We
down the
used to,
route
I
of the other
mean, it
way.
was originally launched, of course, as a drug to be used in diabetes for
Of
people
course,
who were really struggling with control, and
yeah,
weight loss was,
a
part
nice
of
side
that.
effect. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
also I would just like to point out that the drug doses are very different for
Yes, which
diabetes.
we'll talk about. I think we'll talk about in another podcast. You can really pull this drug apart for us in terms of exactly how it works and at what doses and everything, because I think that would be really interesting for us.
So yes, I agree. I think if we're general about it, we medicalise it, we lose sight of the root of the problem,
Uh,
which is how we live, our environment. And now, because we've got so far down this path already, I
yeah,
think it's only been about a year.
yeah.
Um,
A lot
the
of people, a lot
pharmaceutical
of
companies,
stakeholders in here.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they're now sponsoring charities.
I saw that.
So that's really
Well, they
fascinating,
sponsoring charities who are saying the individual shouldn't be blamed, and which is right.
which is
But
right.
of course, the reason they're sponsoring isn't quite as clear.
It is not.
So
No.
that's, all this stuff is sort of coming out the woodwork, isn't it?
Mm,
And there's so many factors to obesity.
yes.
This is the problem. And I do think it is more like a metabolic symptom of our lifestyle and
Mm,
not just a disease to be treated, isn't it? Because
mm,
that's, I think, where we go wrong. If we're
mm,
just going to see it as a simple disease process, this is very different to saying, but it's part of a metabolic circle of
yes.
things.
Yeah.
And it's, insulin resistance is in there. There's all sorts of stuff in there. We can't just see obesity as, okay, well, this is the criteria for diagnosis, and this is where you start on this drug.
Mm,
And the pharmaceutical stuff, the answer is so much easier than treating
yeah.
anything lifestyle. We
It
know
is.
that.
It is because you don't have to put any effort in.
We've been through all this before. So just give people insulin to lower their blood sugars without looking at turning off the tap that's making their blood sugars
Mhm,
high. This is the
mhm.
essence of why we do what we do.
This is when you went to that
Yeah.
course and they said that,
Yeah.
you should be able to have pecan pie and just adjust your insulin. Well,
Absolutely.
pecan pie is one of the highest sugar
That was
desserts ever.
stunning. Well, the idea was that you can't tell people what to eat, and also that they should be allowed to eat whatever's available,
Mm,
which is a bit weird.
mm,
Anyway, we won't talk about that, but that was stunning. Okay. That's when I sort of had this epiphany of thinking this is all the wrong
this
way
is a bit
around here.
wrong. So it's being sold as a magic bullet,
Yeah.
as many drugs are, let's be
Yeah.
honest. It's being sold to people who are desperate, who are tiny
Yeah.
poor, who want the nice side effects, who are now being told that they shouldn't blame themselves. And therefore, I think we'll get to the point where we talked about at the beginning, where people might be
Yeah. Be
blamed for not
blamed
taking
for,
them.
yeah,
Mm.
which is another interesting idea.
So the problem, I think, is that if we begin to see obesity as a medical condition
Yeah.
in a silo, then
Yes.
what we do is we change how we manage it. We detract
Yeah.
the attention from investing in the systems that we need to invest in, like we've talked about before,
Yeah. The
healthy food being
environmental
made
system.
cheaper
Yeah.
for people to have, cycle lanes, activities for kids, all of these kind of things.
Fruit and veg to be subsidized and
Yeah.
ultra processed food to be taxed, that sort of thing.
All of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So, unfortunately, it kind of muddies the water there and it doesn't help people to navigate their environment better because
No.
actually you can take these drugs, not change your diet, and still lose weight. I've got to put
Yeah.
that out there.
Yeah, you can.
You can. The fact that it reduces your appetite is great. But if you just go down to one Mars bar a day instead of four,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
will lose weight. So that's interesting. But I
It's
think
very interesting. And appetite drives overeating. So it makes
exactly
absolute sense. It's like using methadone to,
treat opioid
help
addiction.
people who crave heroin. Isn't it? It's a symptom reliever almost.
Hmm.
But what do you do if you can't get it?
Hmm.
Burn.
service users who took methadone and topped up with
Of
heroin,
course
and
they
that is a
did, yeah.
well-known thing.
So the same could happen here, that you've managed somebody's appetite with this incredible drug, which is incredible. We'll go into it in real detail about how
Mm,
it works because I think that'd be interesting for listeners. But what happens if you don't get it?
mm,
And
mm.
are we saying that everybody who gets good effects with this would need it lifelong? I don't actually believe that. I think you could use this drug as a real crutch. And for some people, it gives you hope. And
Yeah.
there's lots, and we'll talk about that. I mean, I think there are some very exciting
I think there's some definite
ways to use
benefits
this
to it,
drug.
yeah. But until we really acknowledge the elephant in the room
Yeah,
is unless you turn off the tap, as you said, unless you change
yeah.
the environment, unless we think about
Our
changing the way we
lifestyle.
live,
Yeah.
you are not going to solve this problem.
No, we sort of know it because we've tried for since, I don't know, my youth, there would have been not many people around. And there are lots of reasons for obesity. It's not just that people are overeating.
No, no,
There's
no.
genetics, there's socioeconomics, there's all sorts of things. So
Mm,
it is multifactorial, great word. To summarize, I suppose, obesity is a complex metabolic condition and it's a risk factor for other chronic conditions.
yeah.
We acknowledge that individuals were and often still are blamed,
Mm,
but in fact, there were many contributing factors involved. But I do think this drug has opened that conversation, which is an interesting conversation.
yeah. I think it's important because the media reports it in a certain way.
Yeah.
I've got
No.
That's really important to note.
Yeah.
There is not a balance in the way that this is being marketed and
Yeah.
advertised.
Yeah.
I think it's changing the way that we see weight,
Yeah.
physically and emotionally, and but also I don't believe that it should be available to everybody. I've got to be honest about that. We definitely can't afford for it to be available to everybody.
Yeah.
My big concern is that unless we do some root cause analysis to
Mm,
find out why it is that these people are suffering with
why
overweight and
we've got
obesity,
there in the
they
first
might,
place.
in
Yeah.
fact, be left in a worse position than they
And that's
started.
something we'll talk about when we unpick this drug, because I think things like loss of muscle mass and things are definitely something to consider. Um, and the risks of things go up and down depending on your indications for use of drugs.
Mm,
So
mm.
you might say, I don't know, blood pressure lowering drugs can make people fall over. But the fact
Yes,
is,
I
you might
can.
be protecting them against very high blood pressures where their risks of strokes or heart attacks are higher. So it's
Yeah,
always a game.
it's never as
There's never a
simple.
meal plan for drugs.
No,
It
and I
is
think
a
if
complicated game.
if there was one thing, considering my background
Yeah,
and the fact that I did, I was a prescriber at one point,
yeah,
and I think it weighs quite heavily on you, is
yes,
you can give somebody a drug that they believe is going to be beneficial for them,
yeah,
and they come in and they just want it, and I get why they want it,
yeah.
but
Absolutely, we
you
all do.
have to
Yeah,
balance against that individual's risks and benefits.
exactly. And
And it
maybe
is, as
that's
you
what we're
said,
losing sight of. So
yes.
we're saying, okay, we've got an answer at last because we haven't had one before. And
Yeah.
whatever we've tried hasn't really worked. So this is a really exciting time. Not only that, I think we're going to find some good effects from
There's
this class of drugs that
undoubtedly
we don't
some good
even know
effects.
about. Yeah,
Undoubtedly, as I said, with all other many other drugs we have these effects. But there's, as I said, a balance to be struck. Should everybody have it? No, I don't believe so. Should it be so freely available? No, I don't believe so. Will
yeah.
it be effective long term? Probably not in the way that we hope that it will, unless we change the root cause.
Yeah, unless we have slot machines on the corners of every street with GLP-1s in. I don't know. It is
Mm,
in so this podcast was not intended to be, a finished conversation. It's really
no.
floating the idea, and that's all I wanted to do is say if we medicalizing this lifestyle issue
Mm,
within a society that is set up to be environmentally really unfriendly to people who want to be healthy,
mm,
how is this drug going to settle in that sort of box of tricks we're trying to use?
mm.
But also, it'd be really nice to talk to you at length about the actual pharmacological bit of
Pharmacological
this.
effects. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be delighted to do that, and I
Let's
hope it
do
won't be
that
too
because
boring.
I think I'd like to really understand in simple language how this works and what's gone into it and what
Mm,
the actual mission of this drug is, and then look at the possible problems and good effects. So
yeah.
let's not forget
And
the
I
good
think
effects.
that's where it always comes down to, with me, is there are goods,
Yeah,
there are bads,
yeah,
and it's all about the individual in front of you. And my
absolutely.
concern is that we have gone away from the individual in front of us.
Yeah, we're so excited about finding it. It's like I don't know, discovering insulin or I don't know, thyroid replacement
Yeah. Yeah.
medication or whatever. We've
Yeah.
sort of lost
Yeah.
ourselves in the simplicity of this.
It's great that we talk about access, and I'm not denying that
No,
people shouldn't have access,
yeah,
but it should also be, on an individual basis.
yeah.
And there are some real horror stories emerging about how
Mm.
people are getting hold of these things and what, in actual fact, they're actually getting hold of, which is not what
And
is
what will we
intended as
learn
well.
in the future? And when we look back, what will we think about our
There's always
initial
stuff to learn.
excitement?
Yeah. So this is the thing,
Okay.
caution, always caution.
Caution. Let's talk about that in another podcast. I'd really love to unpick this drug in detail and from a non judgmental point of view.
Yeah. I think we
Just
just
look
have
at
to
the
be like,
facts.
these are the facts.
Yeah.
What
Would
you
you
choose to
take
do
it?
with them is entirely up to you, of
Would you
course.
take it? You see, I would if I needed the life saving properties of weight loss for whatever reason or diabetic control. I would.
Mm.
So it's not that you'd never take this drug. Would I
No,
take
no, no, no. It's just that
benzodiazepine? Well, I might
well,
in
yeah. I mean, look,
an
if,
acute
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
cute situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Righty ho.
Okay.
Thanks for the chat. See you next time.
See you soon. Bye for
Bye
now.
bye.